Hi, my name's Penny. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about the books that I read in August. So overall, I think I had a pretty good reading month. Maybe we'll see how I feel after I talk through all these books. But basically, I read 16 books in the month of August, but I think I read 6 or 7 of them during Booktubeathon. I can't quite remember whether the last one made it into Booktubeathon or not. But 16 books is a lot of books, so let's just get talking about them. So firstly, audiobooks. I read 6 audiobooks during the month. Now the first 3 of those were the books from the Remnant Chronicles. So that is Kiss of Deception, Heart of Betrayal, and Beauty of Darkness. I wasn't planning to listen to that whole series this month, but after I read the first book, I just couldn't really control myself and I just finished the whole thing. This book has a really interesting setup in that you follow this princess who has been betrothed, but she doesn't particularly want to marry this guy that she's never met, so she runs away. Then she ends up with the prince and also an assassin after her, and she meets up with them. But it's told in such a way that when she meets up with these 2 men, you don't know which one is the prince and which one is the assassin. And of course you can probably tell from that it is set up to be a bit of a love triangle. And normally romance isn't really my thing, but the romance was a lot less significant in the story than I was expecting. So I was pleasantly surprised there. The main theme of the story is really about responsibility and power. But every book had quite a lot of twists and turns that kept it interesting. Although I will say the last book did drag on a bit. I kept thinking that I must be getting near the end, and then I'd check and there'd still be like hours and hours left of the audiobook. But even though it did drag on, it wasn't totally boring. So I still think I would really recommend this series. And I think I gave all 3 books 4 stars. So then the next audiobook that I listened to was Heritage of Cyador by Modesitt Jr. So this is the 18th book of the Saga of Recluce. And I am really close, only 19 and 20 to go, and then I am caught up on this series. I will say, so this book and also the previous one that I listened to last month follow this guy called Delerium. He's basically like this stupid lord type kid who goes out and ends up in a war and learns about how to be a responsible adult, and everything all falls into place. As I've said before with this series, the ones that focus a lot on war I find really boring, and this one was just war all the time. I also find it really frustrating how a lot of the times in these books, the first girl that the guy will run into will be the girl that he ends up marrying and being in love with, which gets a bit boring. It's not always the case, but most of the time. And just in general, I didn't feel like this particular little series really added much that the other books haven't covered. So this series is basically, even though there's 20 books in the series, there's usually only 2 books, 1 or 2 books following a particular character, and then it jumps to a completely different time. But it's all set in the same world with the same idea of order and chaos magic, but there's a lot of war. Often the books do explore some really cool philosophy, but this one was a bit weak in that, in my opinion. Then I did manage to get myself to listen to a couple of work-related books, which means I am making progress on my year-long goal of reading, I think, 10 workbooks. That's good. The first one that I read is Drive by Dan Pink. So this is a really well-known book about motivation. I already knew a bit about this topic, having watched videos before with Dan Pink talking about this topic, but I still got quite a lot from the book, and I think it was a really good refresher. I gave this 5 stars because it totally deserves 5 stars. If you work in any field where motivation is something that you need to deal with, especially the motivation of other people, although still yourself, but primarily the motivation of other people, then you really should read Drive by Dan Pink. So then the last audiobook I read was Nudge, Improving Decisions About Health, Wealth, and Happiness by Richard Thaler and another guy, I think. Or at least we kept talking about another guy in the text. Thaler and Sunstein are the guys who wrote it. So I think I went into this one with kind of false expectations. I thought it was more of a self-help book, and that I'd seen someone talking about applying those ideas to organizations, but it's actually more of a book focused on governments and how governments can kind of design choices to help people make the right decisions. So my camera just ran out of power, so if the frame's slightly different, that's why. So some of the ideas and the content of this book were really relevant to me, but the stories, a lot of these style of books are told in the form of here's some ideas and here's a whole bunch of stories as examples. And most of the actual examples they gave weren't relevant to me, and so they got a little bit boring. Although it was interesting to see, I think this book is from, I've got them here, this book is from 2008, so it was interesting to see how many of the ideas inside this book have actually been implemented now. So I gave it 3 stars because basically interesting ideas, but I probably could have read a blog post and gotten just as much out of it. Okay, so back into fiction. I also read 3 graphic novels. All of these I read during the booktubeathon, so I will link my booktubeathon wrap up somewhere if you want to get like more detailed thoughts about those. But high level, I read Low Volume 1, The Delerium of Hope, by Remender and Tocchini, which is a dystopian future where the sun has expanded, and because humans haven't managed to escape into space, they have gone to live underwater. I gave this 2 stars, so kind of a low rating. But the other 2 graphic novels I read were much better. That is Volume 4 of Locke and Key, called Keys to the Kingdom. Locke and Key is this really great series about all these different keys that give people different powers, and I'm really loving it. I think I would have given this 5 stars. I gave this 5 stars, and I also gave 5 stars to The Umbrella Academy Volume 1, The Apocalypse Suite by Jared Way and Gabriel. So yes, check out my booktube wrap up if you want to hear more of me talking about how much I love those 2 graphic novels. Then finally I read 6 physical books. Now I only have 2 of these that I actually own. The rest were all library books. In fact, all the audiobooks were library books, except Drive, and all the graphic novels were library books. So I got a lot of value out of my library this month. But for the ones that I own, I read The Changeover by Margaret Mahy during booktubeathon. Oh! And then I dropped my camera, so the frame may be different again. This book was really strange and beautiful, and I loved so much of the writing, although it did drag a little bit in parts. But there were so many great bits that I gave this 4 stars. Again, more details in my booktubeathon wrap up. And then the next book is this one, Love in the Time of Metal and Flesh by Jay Lake. So I got this one for free quite a long time ago, and I'm glad I didn't really pay for it because I gave this 1 stars. I don't recommend reading it. It was blah. Again, if you want more of me talking about how blah it was, check out my booktubeathon wrap up, but it was gross, and I will be getting rid of this book very soon because I don't want it. Although I have this bit of a dilemma because I want to get rid of it. I don't really want anybody else to read it. Or I don't want to be responsible for someone reading it. So, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with that book, but we'll see. Then I read To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. So this is a Little Mermaid retelling, except it's set up that the mermaid or the siren is a prince killer. Every year she kills a prince and takes his heart, and the prince is a siren killer. And they end up together on a quest. There's a bit of romance, although I have to say I found the romance quite unbelievable. I saw someone else's review say that they were much better suited to being friends, and I totally agree. But then in general I did feel like the characters fell a little flat. They didn't really feel very realistic. And the story, I feel like there was a lot of potential in the world and the story, but came across as very fairy tale and not very realistic. So there were definitely quite a few flaws in this book. It did take me a little while to read because of that, but still there were some bits that I really enjoyed. So who knows, I gave it 3 stars. half and half average. So next up I read Home, which is the second book in the Binti series by Nnedi Okorafor. I'm really bad at saying that, I apologize. So Binti is this woman who comes from a society where they keep very much to themselves, mainly because there's a lot of racism towards them out in the rest of the universe, or at least on their world. The rest of the universe isn't so bad. She goes off to university on this other planet. In the first book, she has quite a lot of drama just getting to that other planet. In this one, she's heading back home and she's kind of facing the fact that her family still thinks she was very wrong to leave and go to university despite the successes that she's had there. Again, this was a really short book, like the first book was really short. But in this one, I did feel like at the end the story still felt quite incomplete. The first book sort of stood on its own, whereas I feel like the second one really does link into that third one, or I hope so. It was really interesting seeing Binti kind of learn about her heritage and learn that maybe it wasn't exactly how she'd thought her family worked. And I guess that fits really well with the theme of this series, which is really about confronting your assumptions and how things aren't always as they seem. I do hope that the third book will have a lot more of Oku, I think his name is, the kind of alien guy that she meets up with in the first book. Then the next book I read was Gemina, which is the second book in the Illuminae files by Amie Kaufman and Kristoff. So I read the first book in the series a little bit ago and I was a bit on it, mainly because there was a bit too much romance for me, but I did kind of like the AI. It was okay. But I liked Gemina a lot more, even though there is some romance. I think in the first book, because it was an existing relationship, it seemed weird when they were getting into that in this like high threat, you're gonna die kind of situation. Whereas in this book, the romance was kind of set up as more of a coping mechanism for stress that they were undergoing. I was also really into kind of the eventual reveal of what was going on, and I think it just helped. Going into the second book, I had much clearer expectations about the format of the book, and I knew what the reading experience was going to be like, which I think really helped. So in the end, I gave this book 4 stars, and I am really excited to read the final book in the trilogy. I guess I should explain what the trilogy is about, but it's a little bit hard. In the first book, there's this mining settlement that's an illegal mining settlement, and they get attacked by a competitor's spaceship, and they have to, the survivors of that mining planet essentially end up on the run from another spaceship trying to take them out to cover up the fact that this mining planet has been destroyed. The second book follows a different set of characters, although the first ones do have little cameos, but it basically follows on from what happens next after the first book. So you can't talk about it because of spoilers, but it definitely sets up for some exciting stuff to happen in the third book. Then the last book I read this month was Venom in the Veins, which is the 17th book of the Elemental Assassin series by Jennifer Estep. So this actually wasn't a library book as well. This is a book that I bought for my mum for her birthday. I don't have it because my mum's birthday has already been, although technically isn't quite yet. Her birthday party's been, her birthday has not. So this book is the first book in the series that has been self-published. I did talk previously about how disappointed I was in the actual size change of the book series, but it wasn't that bad to read, so I'll get over that. Overall though, I did find this a little bit slower. Like most of these books are quite formulaic. Jin is this assassin who has kind of this found family that she takes care of. She's also the head of the underworld and runs this barbecue restaurant. In every book, some evil person comes along, some stuff happens, and she wins. Probably by killing them. This book followed the same formula, but most of the other books, she's added kind of the right amount of action and enough kind of like mystery and reveals to make it interesting. This one I did think was lacking a little bit, and I'm not sure how much the self-publishing was a factor in that, or maybe it was the other way. Maybe she self-published because she wrote it and they were like, whoa, that's way too slow. Who knows? But I did find it a little bit disappointing, although I'm still waiting for this is kind of like the second or third story, like longer term story arc, and I am really looking forward to seeing where this particular arc goes when we finally get there. I will say, in this book, right at the beginning, I had a guess about who a particular character was, and I was wrong, but I still think that my idea was better. So that was a bit disappointing. Okay, so that was all the books I read in August. I think overall I was pretty happy with it. I read some books that I really enjoyed, and even the ones I didn't like as much were still okay, barring that one-star book. But I am trying to wipe that from my memory. So do let me know if you have read any of the books that I mentioned today. I would love to talk to you about them down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.